Ladies and gentlemen, the time for us to go big has returned, because in this video we're going to build the most powerful and pretty much the most perfect gaming PC you can build in 2025. And we're doing this with an RTX 5090 graphics card, a Ryzen 7 9800X3D, and then pretty much all of the latest and greatest from Corsair, including this new touchscreen that goes on the side of your case. But more on that later. Throughout this video we're going to show you everything that we have, we're going to show you how to put it together, and then of course at the end show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see how this ridiculous gaming PC is going to perform in the latest titles. It is going to be ridiculously fun, ridiculously addictive, and hopefully you're going to enjoy every step of the process. So all that's left to say is a massive thank you to Corsair for proudly sponsoring this video. Let's get started. So yes, I think it's fair to say that this is not going to be the most budget-friendly rig we've ever put together. If you do want to watch a video that's a lot more affordable, you can find it in the top right corner of your screen. But as I say, we're going for ultimate, we're going for all out in every aspect and every inch, if you like, of your gaming PC. And we'll walk you through everything as we proceed, including the cool little touchscreen. But as always, your gaming PC is going to start with the motherboard. I'd actually choose this as your third component, but obviously it's the base for everything else. This is X870E, and to be honest, we don't actually use these that often on the channel. And the main reason for this is just because they, I don't want to say are needlessly expensive, but most people don't have a need for the expensive motherboard. Most people are better off going for either B650, B650E, or X870, or B850 really. So quite a lot of numbers to throw at you there really, but the X series has always had extra bandwidth, which means you get extra features. I mean, if you look at the I/O of this board, you can see you've got loads of USB, including USB-C. All of them really are ridiculously fast. You've got the latest Wi-Fi standards. Here we've got Wi-Fi 7, we've got 5 gig Ethernet, burst flashback. The motherboard itself as well has loads of cooling all over the VRMs, and obviously it supports loads of PCIe SSDs. So all of this is fantastic, and don't get me wrong, I think all of us would rather have a motherboard like this than something like a B650 motherboard, but obviously it kind of depends on what you're willing to spend and what features that you need. As you'd expect, I'm going to plop this down on top of the motherboard box, and then we're going to proceed to our CPU. And this is pretty much the main choice I think you're going to have if you're going for this spec of build, because there's pretty much two CPUs that you're going to consider. This one, in theory, for most people is going to be the best option. This is the Ryzen 7 9800X3D. It's an 8-core chip. It's ridiculously fast. It pretty much is the fastest chip for gaming, but it does have a slightly bigger cousin that has this exact same chip with an extra CCD with 8 cores more inside. And usually it would be obvious just to go for the 16-core version, which is the 9950X3D. But the issue with that is that if you're not going to do any forms of productivity or anything else with your gaming PC, that CPU for best performance quite literally shuts off those extra 8 cores and then becomes a 9800X3D when you're gaming. So if you're primarily building a gaming PC, even if you have like an endless amount of money to spend, this is still probably the best chip for most people. But as I say, if you're going to do productivity on the side and use 16 cores, fantastic. But for gaming, it kind of gets a lot more complicated really, and you'd be better off with this. But we're going to take it out of the box. We're going to open up our slots. We'll drop this down and secure it into position. And then perhaps interestingly, in terms of the memory or the RAM that we're using, we're over-speccing this again ever so slightly. This is actually 48 gigabytes of the stuff. And you can go for super fast speeds, but I still think 6000 megahertz is going to be ideal for most people, especially as, well, it is overclocking if you enable the XMP or Expo profile, but 6000 megahertz is a lot easier to get stable. So as soon as you start to go to these like 7000 megahertz plus kits, you might find that you have to do some manual kind of overclocking or downclocking in order to get it stable. You know, it depends on the memory kit, depends on the board and the BIOS and things that you're using, but I just find that for most people this is probably going to make a whole lot more sense, especially when it comes to price performance, although we're not really taking that too much into account in today's video. But this is obviously DDR5, not DDR4, and you just want to line this up in slots 2 and 4 and realize that your life becomes complete. Oh, I was going to say when you get that satisfying click, but that one was a little bit thuddy. I'm not satisfied, I want to do it again. Oh, that's better. Once your RAM is in nice and tight as a tiger, you can then press on and move to the SSD. I'd actually probably go for a 2 terabyte here, and because PCI Generation 5 has actually come down significantly over the last 12 months, you absolutely could consider going for a PCI Generation 5 SSD for this rig, and I wouldn't hold it against you, but the usual thing applies again. It's not really going to make a drastic difference, if any, to the real world gaming performance that you're going to see. So I doubt that your games are really going to load any noticeably quicker. I mean, okay, maybe you get like 0.3 seconds, but I mean, you try counting to 0.3. It's very difficult. So instead, we are going to stick with good old PCI Generation 4, and this is a massive heatsink actually. I have used this board, I think, once before, but I think we went for this thing, whereas today, look, we're going for the other side, and there's actually 2 heat sinks here in kind of one unit, or at least 2 slots covered by 1 heatsink. And you can see again, it's absolutely massive. And as you'd expect on a really high-end motherboard, this does actually have like a double-sided pad here. So if you're using a large capacity drive and you've actually got storage on both sides of the SSD, it's not going to overheat as quickly as it would in a single-sided one. You do need to be careful of that, especially on a higher-end SSD. Then we can pick up our MP600 Elite, and as always, if you do want to check out current pricing, because it changes all of the time on everything featured, you can find that listed down below in the description and as a pinned comment. But we're just gonna neatly drag that in, get that caught up, and then our heatsink, look, can just sit back on top, and then of course screw down. And then once you've done that, there's actually just one more thing left to do with your motherboard before it's ready to go in your case. And that is to actually start thinking, not necessarily doing, but start thinking about your CPU cooler. And I used the smaller version of this last week, so to the top of my head. But in particular, you need to think about the mounting mechanism, because of course, if you're going for an air cooler, you're gonna put this on now. Whereas going for an all-in-one, sometimes you need to remove this default AM5 mount, or other times it might actually hook onto it. So think about what you're doing, but this one is actually really easy to install because it goes straight in the motherboard holes once you've taken this off. So just take that 30 seconds to remove the AM5 plastic mount, trying hard not to kind of lose any of these screws, or you'd be very sad if you ever need them again. And then your motherboard is actually complete. Really, really easy and straightforward, as I say. And now you can get on to the most personal bit of any rig. And I've been really excited for this because I've built loads of times in the 5000D from, I was going to say yesteryear, I mean only a couple of years ago. But they've now tried to make it even better. And one of the ways that they're doing this with this new Frame 5000D is all about modularity, because it's quite common, isn't it, that you choose and spend a lot of time on a case, you're building it, you're happy, and then maybe like a year, 2 years later, it's not that you get bored of it, but there's always things you want to do to it. And fundamentally, I think if it's always going to stay the same, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You don't want to spend a load of money to get a whole new case, but you also just are a little bit bored and you want to make upgrades. So the whole idea with the frame is that it can kind of like work with you, and you can swap bits out and make it your own and just build it up over time. Or if you just maybe don't want these fans here at the front, you want them at the side, it's very easy to kind of move things around. And the cool thing that we're doing here today is this side piece. I mean, I can actually take this off. Factory fitted screw that wasn't too tight, how about that? And you've got this little, I don't want to call it card, but this little insert that you can actually remove if you want to kind of see into it, or they give you this translucent bit as standard so you can kind of hide the cables and things. So the whole way throughout this case, we'll show you as we go, is kind of thinking about giving you options. But as I say, we can take this out, but you can see as well now, like you've got kind of this like pegboard style for the actual motherboard tray. And this just means if you want to move things around, look like, well, I haven't actually tried this. How's it going to come out? Does it just pull? Don't want to break it. Oh, right, okay. I was being a little bit silly. We fast forwarded a few minutes for me to work it out. Essentially, look, you've got these little pins in the back here, look. So you just take the strap off, or at least move it out of the way, and then this pin removes, and then that's how you get it on and off. So look, if I want to put this here, let's say, get the pin again, put that in the hole like that, and then boom, that is nice and safe and secure. Now let's move this out of the way and put it back where it was, because it was actually in quite a good place. But while I'm spending far too much time working all of that out aside though, there's a lot of features here that are pretty cool. So you've got this removable motherboard tray. You can either put your motherboard on this, or you can obviously upgrade this to something thicker, or just that looks different. But for most people, really, it's just going to be the fact that you've got loads of thickness here. So if you want to add like really large RGB hubs or controllers or anything really, it's just nice to have a lot of space, so it's going to be easier to close the side panel. I also like that you do get this panel here that doesn't force you into putting a load of fans down the side. I mean, this does support it. You can put a total of 3 140 fans down the side here, or a 360 rad, but not everyone's going to want to do that, right? Some people either prefer it or just don't want to spend the extra money, so it's great that you get the plate fitted there as standard to hide everything up. Loads of space down the bottom as well, good ventilation on both the top and the bottom of the PSU shroud. And when we give this a spin, you should be able to see that we get our 3 140 3 140 fans fitted as standard at the front, and we also get one at the rear. But you can, as I say, put 3 140s here, but we're actually going to put a 420 radiator at the top, because you've got ample space here. And I also like the fact as well that this top piece has been reinforced compared to the original 4000 frame that I had. I think they've actually improved this anyway since I first covered that, but this is now a lot more rigid, which is obviously quite hard to do. Bear in mind, it's very open and has a lot of airflow. It's very easy to have a rigid top piece, but getting that with lots of airflow, not so easy. But enough gassing, everyone. I think it's time to actually get our build started properly, and we're going to do this by getting our now completed motherboard, and just by dropping this in So let's get this maneuvered till it clicks into place. And then I'll grab this absolutely huge accessory box that actually came in the box. And somewhere in here we should find our screws. It's nice that they come in paper bags actually. Corsair being a bit more eco-conscious, but they've failed to label the bags, which would have helped. But let's get this fitted down. Then we're going to take this top piece off of the case, and then we can start thinking about the radiator. Now, a lot of smaller cases, I'd recommend getting all of the other cables in first and getting your power supply and kind of like getting one of those cables plugged in at the top here, because the room does really start to get a bit cramped, shall we say. Whereas because this is such a big enclosure, I don't think there's going to be a problem. So what we have here, as I say, is our IQ Link Titan 420RX RGB. But I do like the fact, actually, not only is this a high-performing product, the price isn't too bad, but obviously you're definitely paying a premium for 420, but it comes pre-assembled, look. So as long as you are actually going to be using this as an exhaust, it's going to take you a lot less time. I mean, there is no doubt about it, is there, that this is definitely quite big. I mean, look at the size of that. It's a bit overkill for a 9800X3D. If you want a really cool and as close to silent gaming PC as you can get, I think this is going to help you out. To get this installed, and just to save a little bit of time, I'm going to plug the fan cable in now, because that's going to get a bit fiddly when we put this inside the chassis. But it really is as simple as that. One cable for those fans. It's going to go straight to the hub, and then we can literally just slide this into place, grab our screw, get that fitted, and then of course do the same with the rest. So that of course is the radiator side of things complete. Now we just need to take this Intel bracket off the pump head. Then you want to grab the AMD bracket, slide that over, and then click it into position. And then all you need to do is line that up with those holes. Thermal paste is pre-applied, and then just screw to your heart's content. Oh, and then that, ladies and gentlemen, is our cooler installed. Now for our next trick, eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that we don't actually have the IQ compatible, or at least not without an adapter, IQ compatible fans fitted to this case as standard. As I say, you've got a few different variants depending on the way that you want to go, but the way we're rectifying this today is by going for some RX 140 RGB fans, essentially to match the cooler. All of these are going to be the same, and we're going to try and populate every slot. And remember, these are 140s, not 120s. And I've got to admit that usually the idea of adding 7 extra fans to a system would give me a little bit of a headache. It'd be loads of cables and it'll take ages, but to be fair, with these Corsair fans, it's actually pretty straightforward because they kind of daisy chain and interlock together. You do need to add these little pins, if you like, to the fans, but if you do this on a desk, they literally just push together like that. And whilst I wouldn't advise throwing them across the room, you can see that they are actually pretty sturdy. They've got the quick fast screws that will go in to just speed up the process. And then once you do that, rather than having loads of different cables, you essentially just have, that's the wrong one, you essentially just have one cable that goes into each bank of fans, and that can go out to a different block of fans, and then it goes into one of these hubs. And obviously it depends on the amount of devices that you're using, but most rigs you'll just need one of these, and then you connect it with one single PCIe power connection, and then use IQ to control it all together. So it's really easy, and actually, as I say, for adding a lot of fans, pretty simple. So let's toollessly remove the front and the dust filter, take out the old ones. Then we'll insert the new RX 140s and screw those in. We'll then take out this side piece, grab our other bank. Oh no, we need to grab the bracket from the box, which should resemble this. Slot that in there, screw it down. Oh, and then is this gonna fit? I mean, I think it will eventually. Just might have to get clever. I was getting nervous then, but I think we're all right. There we go. Plop that in, plug it into our radiator fans, keep one ready for our hub, and then literally just secure it in. Just one left to go now. Out with the old, and in with the new. Right, everyone, let's fast this forward just a little bit and try not to drop anything, because I realized I've changed my mind on like orientations loads and loads of times in the way that we're plugging everything in. So let's get you updated with everything that I've done rather than just, as I say, explain it over and over again. So you've got USB-C and you've got this like IQ Link input on this. I'm going to test whether you need the USB. I have a feeling that the USB-C on this might be used for expandability if you're going to like put an LCD on it or something like that at a later date. But if we need it, we'll soon find out when we get this turned on. But what we've got in the meantime is one chain that goes in here at the bottom, in through these 3 fans, and now into this pump head unit. And then we've also got the 3 plugged in starting here, all the way up here, then it comes into these 3 fans, and then it finishes up with this one at the back. So that's what I mean about it being quite flexible actually. There's not necessarily like a one size fits all for getting everything connected, but you want it to be neat and obviously you want it to actually work. What I've also then done is get the hub located in its kind of neat, tidy Corsair spot that they have for it on here. It is magnetic, it just hooks in like that. You can see I've done a bit of cable management. So we've got one in here, one in here, and then we've got our power. And actually with the new cooler, if I can find it, upgraded the cable look to something a little bit more snazzy, because the other one is a little bit ugly, but that came in one of the boxes of fans and doesn't really need to be changed. We've got this little dummy cable just so the motherboard can actually get some cooler information and it doesn't give you a CPU fan speed error when you boot it up. I've also plugged in our power supply just to the CPU at the top right because I knew this was going to get a bit fiddly. My only real bit of feedback, shall we say, to Corsair, something that I don't specifically like about this case at the moment, is that this hole here for your cutout, essentially, for the cable for the CPU, that is a little bit too small. To be clear, it's not too small to use. I've plugged it in, it's fine, but it would be way easier to build in if this was wider and a little bit bigger, just so it's just quite a bulky head to kind of ram through, especially when you're using two cables. It fills up quite quickly. So that's a little bit annoying, but as I say, not the end of the world. And then we also have our USB connection as well for the hub, so we can get this plugged in. We're also going to take the opportunity to unbundle all of our front panel connections, and you can see we actually have 2 USB 3s here, because you do actually have a total of 4 USB-A on the front of this, which is really nice, but it is one of the reasons why you need one of the latest, or at least a high-end motherboard, because most only have 1 single USB 3 header, whereas this board helpfully has 2. We also have a couple of RGB cables for the front of the case here as well. This looks like the old style of Corsair RGB, or you can just use this addressable RGB. But otherwise, it's pretty much business as usual, really, with our HD audio, USB 2, front panel connection, 1 USB 3 here that looks a little bit fiddly to plug in. So let's do that after we've plugged in this top one, our USB Type-C, addressable RGB for the case, and then what looks like our CPU power just above the CPU socket. Hopefully then, at this stage, all of the fans, radiators, everything are all plumbed in, quite literally, connected and ready to go. But let's now move on to what has to be the best bit of any gaming PC, by far the most exciting, and I think the bit that will make you the most nervous when it comes to installation, if you've gone out and spent almost £2,000 of dollars on an RTX 5090. And the reason we haven't covered this in a while, actually, is mainly just because obviously there've been a load of other cards released and they're more mainstream, but then also because £2,000 of dollars is such an astronomical amount of money that you've got to be a very particular kind of person, don't you, to want to invest in this. And don't get me wrong, this is by far the best gaming graphics card and graphics card for many things that you can get for a consumer PC. And if you are willing to spend that sort of money on a graphics card, then you are going to be very, very happy with the performance that this gets. I mean, in terms of like pound or dollar per frame, clearly it's not where the more budget-friendly cards are going to be, but if you want to play at 4K resolution and above, you want to enable path tracing, you want all of those NVIDIA technologies, then obviously this is going to be your best bet. This particular card is actually from Palette. This is their Game Rock. I like that they've kind of toned this down a little bit. I mean, you're looking at this and saying, tone down, really? But when you remember the old like crystalline cards that we had on the previous generations, yes, they have toned this down a fair bit actually versus the previous generation, and it kind of, in a nice way, just looks a little bit more mainstream. And bearing in mind, you're probably going to have this in your PC like this. It's going to look quite normal, and you're just going to have a lot of RGB kind of shining from the underside. But all of the 5090s that I've tested so far have been excellent. I mean, even the water-cooled cards and things, right? They're better in terms of temperatures, but every single 5090 that, I'm not going to use the word affordable, but is more at the RRP, they tend to perform similarly, to be honest. And if you're going to manually overclock, you'll be able to beat any of the out-of-the-box overclocks anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about the specific card. I just obviously look at reviews and make sure it's good enough in terms of thermals and match one that kind of goes with your rig or the theme that you're going for, really. And that's kind of what we're doing here today. So we're going to open slots 2 and 3. And it's worth noting as well with this case, if you do want to go for a vertical GPU mount, this whole plate literally just unscrews with a couple of thumb screws, and then you can rotate it round and vertically GPU mount. But obviously you will need a riser cable that is sold separately if you want to go down that route. This actually has 3 PCIe fingers removing, or that need to be removed. So let's get those out, and then very gently, trying not to damage what is, as I say, about £2,000 worth of graphics card. Oh, okay, on this board, we need to go one lower. Slots 3, 4, and 5. Yes, there you are, look. Clicks into place. And then hopefully very promptly get this fitted down, because obviously it's a lot of weight and you don't want to stress out your slot. Once you've done that, it's also worth noting that this case does have this little GPU sag bracket as standard, and I like the fact that it's got a thumb screw on it, so you don't need to kind of do it from the other side, look. I use a screwdriver just to make this slightly easier for reach, or I can just come round, look, to the other side. Push your card up a little bit, because obviously remember, it is sagging down until you secure it. And then with that thumb screw, get that nice and tight, and then I'll come round, because you probably can't see. Hopefully now, look, just this short stubby GPU sag bracket that you can't actually see, but does a very good job of keeping this stable. I like that. I don't want it to be over the top. I don't want it to be too big so it's going to interfere with fans. Do a little test. Yeah, looks great actually. Then we just need to finish by grabbing our power supply. And the one that we're using here is actually part of their Shift series. So this is a 1000-watt power supply with ATX 3. Let's get our connections plugged in though. 2 for that PCIe Gen 5. We will of course also plug in those CPU cables that I kind of pre-managed earlier. And then this being a Shift power supply, it's quite neat, because it will just fit in this little gap, fan facing downwards, and then you can see you can actually still access all of these power connections, look, without having to take your power supply out. And it's one of the banes of my existence, honestly. So if you want to make upgrades or you've just done something wrong, much easier to kind of like retain access. Oh look, and I like these thumb screws look for the power supply, that's cool. But let's feed our PCIe cable through, along with our ATX, get our Corsair hub connected to PCIe power, and then get our graphics card connected. And then last, but certainly not least, our ATX. And then, ladies and gentlemen, we would normally have our gaming PC complete. And as you can see, it looks very neat. We've got a lot of fans. But remember, we're not done, because there's one more thing to go. And that, of course, is our Xeneon Edge, a touchscreen display for the bottom of this. And I'm going to be interested to see just how big it is. It looks big in the picture. And I say as well that we've used quite a lot of expensive gear today, but I don't think this is actually crazy for the asking price, or at least the asking price isn't crazy for what you're getting. So let's take off this little cover look, and then, ladies and gentlemen, there we have our touchscreen. And I'm going to be really interested actually to see not only what you can put on this, but also how you can interact with it and whether it works whilst gaming and all of that stuff. I'd like to think iQOO is going to be our friend here. What else do we get inside the box? Look. Is this a mount for it? Oh, I see. That's so you can have it on your desk, look. So you don't actually have to have this in your PC at all, look. So if you want it just kind of near the computer you already have, boom. Oh, that's actually HDMI to DisplayPort. But then you also get, look, USB Type-C and USB control. Okay, so this is a proper display then. Oh, well, ladies and gentlemen, you couldn't make this up. I've run into a small error. Like, it's okay, we will survive. But I don't know why. I just assumed that I had the bracket for this case so that this would literally just kind of like, well, mount down the bottom. But turns out this accessory is coming a little bit later because they needed to modify the tooling slightly. So you will be able to have that mounted down the bottom, but apparently not for like a couple more months, which is a little bit annoying. And I'd usually say, well, this is fine because look, this just magnetically mounts down there at the side. This is the side piece, boom, it will sit on that, and then we can plug that in here and then have it in our PC vertically. But obviously I've already taken the opportunity to put 3 140mm fans there. So a little bit frustrating, but what we can instead do is use it how you would be able to use it if you bought this, even if you didn't have one of these fancy new Corsair cases, which is with this little mount. And then you can either have this at the side of your PC, as I say, or like behind your keyboard or something. So let's get this hooked up once our PC actually works and see what it's all about. Sorry about that, guys. If I'd known, I wouldn't have put the fans in. This is what it looks like with a little bit of cable management, but nothing crazy. But as I say, is this gonna boot? Let's get our mouse and keyboard receiver in. Let's get our power into our monitor. And then here we are. Is it going to function? I'm hearing noise. I'm seeing a bit of light, so I'm gonna go with yes. Fans start spinning. Are we gonna get any RGB on them? They are RGB fans. Yes, yes we are. And then, ladies and gentlemen, look at that. And here's the thing, right? I always say if you want like the best level of FPS per dollar, then obviously you don't need to go crazy on like the highest end GPUs and loads of fans and things. But if you do kit out your gaming PC, it is going to look absolutely incredible. These fans are really nice actually. But yeah, like, it all perfectly matches as well. That's really nice. Only thing I've noticed is there isn't actually any illumination on our pump. So maybe we do have to get that hooked up to that USB after all. Or it could just be an RGB configuration thing. I'm going to go into the BIOS look, and we can see for ourselves by looking at the CPU temp. I mean, actually, our CPU temperature is at 34 degrees. So that seems okay. So let's enable XMP, save and exit. That seems to have taken, but we do have a CPU fan speed error. So either I've plugged this into the wrong port, or more likely, as I say, I just haven't got the cooler configured properly with all the cables. So I think give me a few minutes to get all of that sorted. I guess a couple of hours to get the games installed, and we'll be right back. With the power power of time, he returns with everything set up and ready to go. And actually, it was all very, very straightforward. As I say, just swapped out this cable. I clearly just had a very early power supply, so it was like £8.50 or £9 or something to get this much sharper right angle cable actually, which is quite cool. And then turns out that the CPU pump, not error, but the reason it wasn't showing up in the motherboard was because I was using one of the fan hubs and not the one that actually came in the box with the cooler. So a firmware update fixed that, and then everything was set up and ready to go. And I've got to say, it's an absolutely stunning looking system. I really like the kind of default lighting that you get in Corsair. They call it like watercolor, just because it's RGB, but just a little bit lighter. Personally, I like that, but obviously you've got the full customization, load of effects and things that you can do as usual. But you also, hopefully notice, this huge whacking display that's obviously now populating my desk. As I say, it would be nice to get the full integration when that comes out in a few months' time actually into the case, or obviously you can stick it with the magnets on the side, but most people will just have this on their desk, and it works really well actually. You can use it in a couple of different modes. Basically, you can use it as like a stream deck. You can use it like this, where you've got widgets and things to not only show you what's going on, but you could potentially launch a game just by tapping one of the icons, or just use this as a secondary display. Clearly, there's a lot of different ways you can use this. Personally speaking, I think just being able to monitor all of your temps at a moment's notice is great. But in this instance, I think we're going to start with some Horizon, shall we? So we'll tap the Horizon button, and as if by magic, look, it launches. Oh, and actually, whilst it's doing the shaders, we can do ourselves a little peel. So indeed then, here we are in some Horizon Forbidden West. We've got this running at the very high preset. You can see this is absolutely stunning. Of course, we're running this at 4K. We do have DLSS at the moment set to balanced, and we're getting around about 165 to 170 FPS. Now, there's gonna be lots of people watching this saying, why using this with DLSS? We've got a 5090, surely that's ridiculous. I personally disagree. This is a 240 Hz display. I'd always want the highest frame rate possible, but if you don't believe in DLSS, then we can go over to display, find where it says balanced, turn that off, and then set our anti-aliasing to DLLA, which essentially is using DLSS, but the input resolution is 1 rather than like 0.67 or whatever the quality setting is. So as you'd expect, the frame rate has gone down now. We're looking at around about 125 frames a second. And to be fair, it's not like you need any more frame rate in something like Horizon, but especially if you're using this with a mouse and keyboard, obviously it's always nice to have that highest level of frame rate. But I mean, this is the point, right? I mean, NVIDIA does get a lot of stick, including from myself, about some of their technologies, but DLSS 4, in particular, the super resolution is really, really good, and I highly recommend that you have it experiment and see what works best for you. If you're interested, by the way, in a full, like, detailed account, if you like, of the differences between DLSS frame generation, DLSS super resolution, XeSS, FSR, you can find this video in the top right corner that we've just done that explains everything in much greater detail. But as I say, firing up our next title, we have this, which is some Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It is the game that I thought was only going to be like 10 hours long, but maybe I'm just a perfectionist, but I'm trying to like basically do everything that there is. And I've been playing this for months now, and I think we're approaching the end, but still not exactly end in sight. And I've got to say, I've been really, really enjoying it, so I do highly recommend it if you haven't played it yet. And at these exact settings, at 4K, you can see we're getting around about 170 frames a second or so. I mean, let's actually have a look at our settings though. Everything is set to high at the moment. Path tracing is off, and DLSS is performance. So this is obviously a very intense game for not only the CPU, but obviously the graphics card as well. But let's get this to a little bit more 5090 settings. I think we'll change DLSS to balanced. We'll change our settings to supreme. We'll restart the title, and I've got to admit, I'm surprised. I thought this was going to tank the FPS a lot more than it has. We're looking at around about 150 frames a second now, so that's not changed too dramatically. And this is still without using any DLSS frame gen or anything like that. So I think we probably can up the ante a little bit further. Let's scroll all the way down now to path tracing, and we get this turned on to medium, and then come out of that. And now this has definitely lowered the frame rate. And this is why personally, I've been playing with path tracing off. A mixture of that, and then there's been some like weird artifacting every now and then. Not frequent, but I just prefer just one setting and just kind of fire and forget essentially. But you can see that that does make quite a dramatic difference. I mean, obviously the visuals are going to be better with path tracing. That's the whole point, especially when you sort of get into some caves and start doing a little bit more exploring. And again, like 95, 100 frames a second in something like this is still way more than you need. So I would definitely advise like playing around with it. But personally speaking, I've actually been playing with path tracing off, but everything else at supreme. But let's see what happens if we turn on our frame gen, set this to 2x, wait for it to restart, and then as if by magic, our frame rate has now increased massively to around about 180 FPS. Obviously, this is frame smoothing, so it's not exactly making the game feel more responsive, but the latency is still under the 55 millisecond mark that I personally would recommend to people. So if I was playing this with a mouse and keyboard, I think this would be the way I would choose to play, but I'm playing with a controller, so I just want to minimize the latency as much as possible, and the TV is 120 FPS, so it wouldn't make a massive difference to me, but if you have a high refresh rate monitor, as you can see, you're getting the smoothness of 160 frames a second, probably around about like 85 frames a second of like smoothness when it comes to latency and the way that the game feels. So I think all in all, you're going to be very, very happy playing Indiana Jones on this PC. But from something quite slow to something very fast-paced, this of course is Doom: The Dark Ages. It's a game I've been enjoying, but I'm still playing Indiana and I can't do everything at once, so ooh. You have died. So how about we just press on and talk about the performance, shall we? So this is running at the highest settings, so this is Nightmare. Now, path tracing is currently disabled though. We'll turn this on again in just a second, but DLSS we've got set to balance running at 4K, and you can see again, 150 FPS. This really is the sort of title you want to kind of maximize it really, because it's a FPS, you want it to feel as good as it possibly can, and yeah, it really does feel great. Our latency is under 20 milliseconds at the moment, which is pretty darn cool, but let's see what happens if we do tweak this, shall we say. I mean, this is a 5090 with a 9800X 3D. You'd expect this to run well. Let's turn our path tracing on. We hit apply, and I'm going to guess it's going to drop down to about 100, and it's gone less actually. There are different levels of path tracing in this, and obviously it is a very, very intense setting, but now we're getting around about 85 frames a second or so, which again, don't get me wrong, like it sounds insulting, but it's perfectly playable. It is still nice and responsive, but obviously when you were playing at 150, it's quite a dramatic difference. So personally speaking, I would definitely advise, I don't want to say use frame generation, because obviously you want it to feel as nice as possible, but this is where I think most people would probably want to fiddle around with the DLSS settings. Just to try and get it a little bit more responsive. So let's do just that. Change this to performance, and as you'd expect, that has increased the frame rate now. Not like crazy amounts, we're now looking at basically 85 to 100 FPS, but obviously it is better and the game definitely feels nicer as a result. So I think if you did want all of the visuals, this would definitely be a great way to play, but obviously again, if you want the extra smoothness, you can turn on DLSS frame generation. Now, I personally wouldn't here, because again, it's an FPS, but if you do want to do it, you can set it to 2x, and then that does give us the smoothness associated with 150, 160 FPS. Just to demonstrate as well, I wouldn't recommend this in most titles, but if you want the absolute maximum smoothness, you can set your DLSS frame generation to 4x, and then now we can clearly see that you're getting the highest level of smoothness that we've seen from the whole test, around about 250 frames a second. And I've got to admit that the game still feels really nice. I think for your average Joe, you wouldn't really be able to notice anything wrong with this, which is quite something, because especially in Cyberpunk, maybe it's just because it's a slower paced game, or there's more going on, or the frame rate itself is lower, but in Cyberpunk I was noticing like a little bit more smeariness, and you can see it there a little bit, but it's actually the first game I think I've played at 4x that kind of actually looks and feels pretty good. Usually I'll be looking at maybe 2, maximum of 3, but yes, if you do have a 240Hz display, actually this is a pretty good experience. Even though it's using fake frames, it's definitely worth experimenting with, and you can clearly just find the settings that work best for you. But ladies and gentlemen, we can't sit around and play single player games all day. I think it's time to up the ante and move on to our multiplayer. And this is Fortnite. This is the game that I probably played the most. And I gotta say, I don't think I've ever seen such a high frame rate in Fortnite. I mean, you need a great combination of CPU and GPU in order to gain this, and obviously we're playing this at 4K as well, so this is what I would call competitive settings, but still high-end competitive settings. So we've got our view distance set to epic, and we have our textures at epic. Everything else is at high, but obviously we don't have our lumen or our nanite enabled, because that frankly would be a massive waste of resources. But as you can see, we're still getting around about 300 frames a second, which is quite wild really, and if you're not good at the game, you only have yourself to blame here. I mean, just like that, I got killed by Daddy apparently. And here's the thing, right? We've said this before and we'll say it again. If you want like the best value for money, then this is clearly not the system for you, right? A 5090 is ridiculously overkill. If you have any kind of use for it besides gaming, so obviously if you're a content creator and you can use this for actually speeding up your workflow as well, it's going to be a lot easier to justify. But purely from a just gaming point of view, it's so much faster than all of the other graphics cards. I can absolutely see why you'd want it, but as I say, it's such a large amount of money that Is path tracing really gonna be worth it for you? Is the extra, 60 frames a second in multiplayer titles or whatever gonna be worth it for you? There's not a right or wrong answer. If you've got loads of money to spend on a system and you want the absolute best, then there's not really anything I would change about this other than, as I say, maybe a 5950X3D if you're going to use it for productivity as well. But from a gaming point of view, this basically is the absolute best of the best. It's all but silent as well whilst running, which is very, very good, bearing in mind that you can obviously draw getting on for 600 watts. It's about 500, 550 watts on a 5090. It's frankly ridiculous. And the whole system, as I say, is basically silent. Really, really impressive. In terms of temperatures and things, I can see 65 degrees on the CPU, and we're getting 66 degrees on the GPU, so neither of these are running particularly warm either, as you'd expect. So yeah, all around, I've got to say, I'm incredibly happy. I like this new case as well. It didn't come as a surprise because obviously it's a revision really of the previous generation 5000D, but I think the size, if you're after something bigger, I love the form factor. I like the new mesh on the front as well, where it's got a little bit more airflow, but kind of looks cool at the same time. But I think the question very much goes out to you on this. What do you make of our rig? What do you make of the screen as well down the bottom? Is this something you'd be interested in? If you are, then current pricing on everything is linked down below, so you can obviously see if it's in stock and see how much it costs. But if you've enjoyed this video, smash the like button. It really helps out. Get yourself subscribed. But thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.